Hello and welcome to Kinship Earth Connections, a monthly networking event series for evolutionary leaders and heart-centered Earth advocates. I'm your host, Lauren Archer, Executive Director of Kinship Earth. At each Kinship Earth Connections event, we introduce members of our network, help facilitate introductions and strategic alliances, and foster our growing community as one global network, working together on our shared goal of helping humanity awaken to our inherent kinship with all life on Earth. Today, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Leah Gibbons, Director of the Regenerative Living Institute, an organization that co-creates interconnected living and learning, educational, research, and catalyzation centers for community-based, regionally scalable, regenerative development, design, and living. They are a 501c3 nonprofit focused on catalyzing shifts towards thrivability in human and more than human communities. The Regenerative Living Institute offers education and certification in what it means to be truly regenerative, developing capacities in whole living systems so that all life continually increases in health, well-being, and vitality. Leah teaches regenerative development and design, community development, ecological design, sustainability, planning, integrated design, holistic health, coaching, consulting, education, spiritual practices, research, and science practice and science spirituality integration. She holds a PhD in sustainability from Arizona State University, an MS in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Tennessee, and many more certifications. Leah is also the director and founder of Koru Collaborative, a regenerative development, design, and consulting firm. She is also a spiritual facilitator and guide at Shamanic Church, a spiritual organization devoted to helping people connect deeply to their true nature as spiritual beings. So please help me give a warm Kinship Earth welcome to Dr. Leah Gibbons.
Thank you, Lauren, so much. And thank you all for being here. It was wonderful to receive this invitation and so happy to be here. And I don't think I have to say too much more about myself or the organizations. Lauren gave a nice introduction. Thank you so much. And I'll just get into what we're going to talk about here. Here's me, Dr. Leah Gibbons, and our organizations, the Regenerative Living Institute. So you can check this out, regenlive.org and korucollaborative.com. And that's how you can get in touch with us. And I'll talk a little bit about Shamanic Church at the end, in case you're interested in that. And what I'm going to go over a little bit today, and we'll have a discussion about, is regenerative development, living, and leadership for a thriving world. And of course, all of us here are interested in how to co-create that. So we have to go back a little bit into the realm of sustainability. We've all been hearing about this word regeneration more lately. And when I first got into this realm of sustainability and development, design, and planning and regeneration, almost nobody knew what that meant, what it was. So I was part of really a core group kind of defining, what does this even mean? And so this is the first thing I want to share with you. What does this word mean, regeneration, regenerative? And how does it relate to other approaches to sustainability and development and design and living? Okay, so regenerative sustainability really is the condition of whole social ecological systems. So in other words, these are living systems, so humans and the rest of life and everything that co-creates life together, right? That's a living system, sometimes called social ecological system, in which health and well-being increase continuously. Health and well-being are defined as vitality, viability, and the ability to change to provide future options. And then thrivability and abundance are the results. So we can simplify all this and just say thrivability and abundance of whole living systems is what regenerative sustainability is all about. And the reason this is the aim of regenerative sustainability, quite simply, is because this is how nature works, right? Nature is always changing and evolving to manifest more life, more thrivability. And there is really no reason that when humans are here on this earth, we cannot be in partnership with the rest of life and manifest this thrivability and this abundance, right? That is why we are here. So that's a little bit of the spirituality part, but we'll get more into that later. So how do we do this? How do we manifest abundance and thrivability? Well, regenerative development is the process. It's a process of developing the capabilities of whole living systems to increase continuously in health and well-being. Okay, now what does this process entail? Well, it's pretty simple to describe the process. It's aligning human consciousness and actions with living systems, principles, and characteristics. Right? Very simple. But what does this mean in actuality, right? In practice? What are living systems principles? How do we align ourselves with them? Right? So that's a little bit more complicated. And that's why Regenerative Living Institute, right, offers education and training and consulting along with our partner organizations to help people do this, because we have quite simply forgotten how to do this. Our indigenous ancestors knew quite well, but since we have entered into this Anthropocene era, all right, where we are heavily steeped in technologies that really separate us from nature and the rest of life, we have forgotten and we need reminders. And so regenerative development, and specifically the regenerative community development framework that I've created, help us align our consciousness, so our thinking, but even deeper than that is who we are as beings. So our consciousness and our actions, right, that comes out of our consciousness with those living systems principles. All right. So now let's relate this to sustainable development, which of course we've been hearing about for decades, which is often defined as meeting the needs of current generations and future generations without compromising the needs of those future generations to meet their needs. All right, so this is a very kind of minimalistic, needs-based definition and approach that tries to mitigate damage, do less harm, be more efficient. And as you can tell, that's a very stark contrast to living thriving lives, right, for humans and every other life form on this planet. So a very different approach. And if I had to choose, which, obviously my choice is to live a thriving life, and my guess would be that most people would choose that as well. And we can do that. So sustainable development really just is basically taking a slower pace and destruction, unfortunately, and degeneration. But that's not what we want to do, really, is it? We want to be regenerative. We want to be thriving. So let's choose regenerative development and regenerative living. A lot of us have heard about regenerative design technologies. So these are systems of methodologies, strategies, and technologies to manifest regenerative development and sustainability. So these are things like regenerative agriculture, which most of us have heard of by now, ecological design. Some of us have heard about regenerative financial systems or economics, which is incredibly complicated, and I could do a whole series of lectures on that. There are things popping up like regenerative education and so on. The list goes on. And the important thing to know about these is that the design strategies and technologies, if they're not part of larger regenerative development methodologies that are designed to catalyze change across scales, they're not actually that beneficial. And so I know that's going to hurt some people's hearts, but you'll see in a minute that when we're doing regenerative work and regenerative living, everything has to be connected and contextualized. And that's the only way to create real change that manifests transformation upscale. Because we are talking about transformation, right? About going from our degenerative and destructive ways of thinking and being in the world to regenerative ones. And this is quite a big change. So it's a transformation in everything that we do. And this gets us into that realm of regenerative living, because we're talking about, like I said, transforming every aspect of how we live and who we are. And so in Regenerative Living Institute and the work I do, I mentioned we take a community-oriented approach, regenerative community development. So why do we do this? Why do we use the lens of community? Well, because basically nature is structured as communities, communities of communities, nested, networked communities. So everything in nature exists in relationship to other things. It exists in wholes. In other words, you can't fragment life. Life exists as wholes, nested and networked wholes. And also, life and communities are always changing and dynamic. So these are actually the three main principles of regenerative development: wholeness, change, and relationship. So through this lens of community is a very effective way of looking at how life structures itself and how we, as human beings who are conscious of what we're doing, can take an approach that will have maximum impact to be regenerative and also to satisfy us and our needs as social beings who want to live in community. Most of us, not everyone, but we have these social needs to be in community. And that means the human part and the more than human part, right? So communities are biogeocultural living systems. They include these elements that sometimes we call non-living, right? The geochemical components like water, rivers, rocks, dirt, which of course is different from soil, but dirt, things like that. And of course, most of us here probably understand these things that have spirit in them. So we might say they're alive, but from just a purely ecological point of view, we say they're not alive. So we call them geochemical components. And in a community, there are strong relationships or flows between these elements that synergize to create life. Now, also in communities, right, humans typically have a very strong connection to their place, right? Like, you know, your neighbors, you know, the local businesses, you know, probably some of the flora and fauna that are in your community. And you have a feeling about your community of perhaps love, which really is what we're going for in regenerative community development. We want to have a strong connection to our place so that we have the will to act for the maximum benefits for all life within our community. So that's why we take this approach, a community approach. So what does this really mean? What is a regenerative community really? Well, we understand as humans, as conscious agents in these communities, that we are partners with all of life in a co-creative dance. We act as conscious catalysts for all life to thrive. That's our gift as humans, right? That we can be conscious about how we're acting and how we're being in the world. And we're at a point in the development of Earth right now where to be those conscious catalysts is extremely important. It's necessary. We must do this. We understand the places we inhabit deeply, this community approach, and align ourselves with nature's and source's life-giving principles. And I say source here as an alternative to spirit or universe, in that when you get into studying spirituality and spiritual teachings and then science and scientific teachings, what you understand is that these life-giving principles are all the same across all scales. And they might use different language, but they're still the same principles. So we have the life-giving principles that are spiritual principles or sources principles are actually the same as nature's principles. We understand our own community's unique character and purpose in the larger communities we are part of, and act in ways that increase the thrivability of those larger communities. And not only communities, but for ourselves too. We understand our own unique character as a human being and what we uniquely bring to the communities we're a part of. And so that's part of it too. We're developing individuals, even as we're developing communities and the rest of life as well. So I just want to mention again, we have this regenerative community development to help us understand what does it mean to act regeneratively? What are regenerative communities? How can we co-create them? So we have a framework that includes a process tool, because the process is just as important as the product, and you cannot separate them, right? Because like I said, one of the three principles is change. Things are always changing, and if things are always changing, then process truly is the only thing that we're ever in. There really is no fixed product that we can look at. We have a integral perceiving tool. So what this tool does is it helps us understand all these flows that give life to a place and all these relationships across scales of space and time, and how we can be those conscious catalysts to sort of interject or change some of these flows or their relationships to create that synergistic emergence that will bring more life to places. And then we have an evaluation tool, which goes through the principles, strategies, characteristics, and indicators of regenerative community development so that we know if we're doing it, essentially. Like, have we done it? Is it in progress? Is it in the process of unfolding ever more life? And so this tool is incredibly helpful. And we teach this tool throughout all of our courses for Regenerative Living Institute. And when we take on clients and do consulting, this is the process we use and the tools we use. So our clients learn this as well. And we teach these things because inner development and outer development are, of course, inextricably related, right? What we see in the outer world is only a manifestation of what is in our inner world. So you've heard me talk a lot about consciousness and being, right? Like, we have to be the kind of people who can facilitate and support thrivability on this earth with us being here. So that takes spiritual development, right? This is the spiritual part. This is where this inner aspect of who we are as spiritual beings having a human experience is crucially important. And we have to focus on this. Once again, we have to focus on our spiritual development. And so this is why a lot of efforts in sustainability just haven't worked, because they're focusing so much on sort of a purely scientific or mechanistic or rationalistic approach that they're missing this inner development. They're missing this part of us that has to recognize and live our interbeing with our higher selves, with each other, with the rest of life. Once we develop that knowing, that absolute knowing, that everything is one, that everything is related, that everything is interbeing, it completely changes how we live on this earth. So that's why I say regenerative development is really a spiritual technology, right? It's linking this inner and outer development, spirituality and science, so that we can show up on this earth in ways that do support the thrivability of all life. Yeah, so this is just stating that again, we're aligning human consciousness, we might even say human being, and actions with living systems, principles, and characteristics. And here I just want to define spirituality. I think everyone in this group considers themselves spiritual, but I often have to define this for people who are more scientific and they want to know what I mean. So I define spirituality as the awareness and experience of belonging to the larger interconnected community of life, of the purpose and meaning of life within this context, and the development of personal and community values and actions out of these. Okay, so it's a pretty vague definition, but I think it encompasses a lot of approaches that people take to spirituality. And when they define themselves as spiritual, it could fit within this definition no matter what their practices are. And if you practice spirituality, then certain things arise out of that, right? This idea of reciprocity and acting in reciprocity so that your actions are mutually beneficial. Responsibility, right? Taking responsibility for your actions, which is incredibly important, right? In the time that we're in now, we have to take responsibility for the damaging actions that we've done on this earth and realize that we can be agents of great, huge amounts of benefit and good on this earth. And when we do that, vitality and prosperity results. Now, it's not to say that science isn't important. Of course, science is very, very important. It's a systematic way of discovering and organizing information or knowledge about the world and how we experience it. It is only one way, right? We have, in our culture, made it the way, right? Like if something isn't scientific, it tends to be discredited. But there are many other ways of knowing and being in the world. So spirituality is one of those ways, right? Indigenous knowledge and practices are so important for regenerative sustainability. And so these are some of the other ways that need to integrate with science, right? Science alone will not help us. We have to integrate it with these other ways of knowing and being, and especially this spiritual approach of interbeing. And so the science that's really important for regenerative development are things like ecology, sustainability science, quantum and unified field physics, transpersonal psychology, consciousness study, design and planning, and there are others, but these are some of the main ones that we draw on. And you can probably see how these are very important for us understanding ourselves as these integral parts of a living system here that will manifest thrivability. And back to the spiritual piece, if a lot of us here probably consider ourselves either spiritual activists or cultural creatives, right? If we're taking this more spiritual approach to our lives in general, and then living from that perspective, from that consciousness, to do good in the world, right? These people are called spiritual activists and cultural creatives. So most of the people I've interacted with in this regenerative realm very much consider themselves to fall into one of these two categories, or even both. And I'm not going to go through these, but you can just look at this some other time and briefly see that spiritual activists and cultural creatives, we are co-creating together a more loving, just, vital world. And we consider everything in the world to be sacred and spiritual. All right. So that covered the regenerative living component. And now we're going to get into regenerative leadership very briefly. Right. So to be a leader in this realm of regeneration is different than we might think of leadership more generally. Right. So regenerative leaders are transformational change agents. Right. They are people who catalyze the perpetuation of health and well-being in the individuals, communities, and systems that we affect and are part of. Regenerative leaders are co-creating reciprocal relationships that manifest ever greater levels of vitality, well-being, abundance, and prosperity, or in other words, thrivability. And regenerative leaders are thinking and acting systemically for the greater good of all life. Right? We understand that our influence reaches across many scales of space and time. And so through Regenerative Living Institute and our partner organizations, we also teach regenerative leadership. And a big part of teaching regenerative leadership is teaching that regenerative community development framework and how to use it and apply it in your community, in your life, and also discovering what is your unique essence that you bring into this world that you can contribute to make it a better place, right? To make your communities a better place, because we all have that. And so through this program, we do a lot of spiritual work, right? We're helping people connect and tap into their higher selves and spiritual realms to really understand what is that unique thing I'm here to do? What is this unique soul expression that I'm here to contribute to the world? And how does that relate to how I'm making it a better place? And what are the tools I can use? This regenerative community development framework. What are the tools I can use to help that? And we bring in a lot of other tools as well, because we want people to have a toolkit they can draw on in their work. And then we create networks, of course, of the leaders and communities and projects. And this is another thing we do as a whole at Regenerative Living Institute, is to create these networks, because obviously we can't do this alone. We're co-creating this, and we need these networks, just like Kinship Earth is creating these networks. So we are rolling out some courses in February through the Regenerative Living Institute. Regenerative Community Development is our flagship course, and we have introductory levels, which are short 2-week just introduction, so you know what it is, right? The basics of how to do it, because there's a lot of confusion out there about what it is and how to do it. And then we have a short course, which is 6 weeks, and then we have a certification course, which is 20 weeks long. And in the certification course, you'll learn really the nitty-gritty details of how to do this. You'll apply it to a project. So you'll come out of this with a tangible plan, essentially, and some actions you've already taken to help your community on its trajectory to become more thriving and regenerative. We also have the same offerings for the Regenerative Leadership Program. And these two are rolling out in February. So if you'd like to know more about them, please email us and we'll tell you about them. And we'll have links soon on our website for applications to enroll in the programs. And only the certification course requires applications, and the other two are open to anyone. And then we have Regenerative Agriculture and Food Systems courses, which will be coming out in June. And those will be structured the same way, with introductory short courses and certification courses. And we'll also have regenerative infrastructure and natural building courses rolling out. Those will be sooner than June, but later than February. So check the website for that. That depends a little bit on some projects we have that are unfolding, and we're not sure when they're going to start. But when they do start, we want students to come and learn how to do infrastructure and natural building regeneratively. And then we've mentioned our other businesses that work with Regenerative Living Institute. So these are Corey Collaborative, which is a design and development firm. So we do a lot of the building projects through Corey Collaborative. And then Shamanic Church helps people with this shift in consciousness and being that is absolutely necessary right now. And so that organization, it's a non-religious church. And we use a lot of technologies that have been with humans, as far as we know, for our entire existence, right, to help us make these shifts in consciousness and help us open up to the, as far as I can tell, the infinite reality that exists beyond our usual human perceptions and senses. And to tap into that and open up to it is really, really important right now. So check out our website and you can get in touch with us through these emails. And really, that is all that I have.
Great. I put the emails in the chat, and thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and remove your spotlight. And when you're ready, you can stop screen share and we can open it up for some participation. One of the things, I had the opportunity to meet Leah in North Carolina in early November. And one of the things I really appreciate about her approach and her work is the accessibility, I think, of your language, and that it's easy for a lot of people to understand. It's not so intellectual that people can't wrap their mind around what you're talking about. And it's really important right now for all of us to get on the same page, so to speak, with what we're saying and what we're doing and how we're cooperating. So with that, I would love to open it up to Q&A. Stephen already has his hands up.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah. Of course, my wife, Sheila, and I are looking forward to meeting you in person in March. We're very excited to do that. And there's some communications with that detail that I'll get with you separately. But I wanted to ask a question specifically about spirituality. In Kinship Earth, we purposely are using the word spirituality. I really love the definition that you put up there, and I would love to explore that more with you in person, the depth of it and how we could use it better in Kinship Earth, because I have a really firm belief that we should not shy away from bringing that word back into general conversation that we all have. And for example, when I was working with the Lakota people, they say, "Mitakwe Oyasin." That means me, you, all created things are one. They say that to each other every single day. That's a greeting, just acknowledgement that that's the reality we live in. So we have to get there in our society and make that inner development happen and a collective human consciousness change. So I'm totally with you. I'm totally on board, and I'm looking forward to an expansion of that conversation regarding spirituality.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And in fact, when I started incorporating it more into my work was when I worked with some Indigenous Hawaiian groups. And the same thing, right? It's very just alive, and they're daily interacting with them, people who were very much like us, right? They do things like we do, but they have this spiritual way of being in the world that is just there all the time. It was so beautiful to see and resonated with me so deeply. I thought, we can do this. We can all do this.
Lovely. Sheila, Dr. Sheila Spain with us from Beaverton, Oregon.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Leah, again, thank you for your very clear presentation. It was very helpful. I'm wondering if your organization has anything for teens, either during spring breaks or during the summer, any intern programs to introduce these ideas to teenagers.
Not yet, nothing specific for teens, but if you have ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Okay, well, maybe we'll brainstorm.
Okay.
All right. Douglas joining us from Florida. Welcome.
From Tampa Bay, the home of the Tocobaga Native Americans. I was going to ask you a very similar question, if there's any way to infuse this into the school curriculum, essentially. Have you explored that? What we're looking for, we're singing to the choir, many of us, but to get it into a population that's not familiar with these concepts. Just interested in how we might do this.
Yeah, we are in the process of developing pre-K, we say through 12, but really it's lifelong education curriculum. So we've already developed a micro-university, how that could function, and the curriculum for that. I was the chair of a college department for a time, so I developed a curriculum at that level for university. And then the pre-K through 12, I have children myself, and so I'm looking at and thinking about, what does this mean to educate children, right, in a way that's regenerative? And so we have some a good foundation for what that could be. Now, pulling together a whole school like that is quite an ordeal, and I would love to do that. This ultimately always comes down to resources, right? To having the resources to do it. There's no shortage of ideas and good intentions. So we always invite collaborators and partners. So if people are interested in working with us on that, we even have a location for the first school in Flat Rock, North Carolina. So we are ready to go. We just need some support. And as far as just offering courses, just one-off courses, we do that all the time, and teenagers are welcome, or younger students are welcome to come join those as well.
Love it. All right, Susan and Walter.
Well, you wanted support, and I've already decided to send you quite a bit of material for the very special spiritual place that we live in, Ecuador. It's a phenomenal model for you. I'll send you a lot of information and you can pursue it. We can talk about it, but you are modeling just like they are, and they'll be thrilled to meet you, and vice versa, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you, Susan, because we are actually in conversations with Dr. Leah Gibbons and her husband, Gabriel, about joining us in Finca Sagrada this June. So for those of you who have seen our website, we're in the early planning stages of a convening at Finca Sagrada in Ecuador for a summer solstice and a regenerative collaboratory. So we'll be bringing all that together. Yes. All right. Are you complete?
Oh,
go ahead, Walter.
You bring up your talk was very good, and you bring up a lot of questions for me. Well, in Ecuador, the Constitution here mentions the right of nature, and we as society have sort of forgotten that the earth has a voice, should have a voice. And to what extent in your program do you talk about the rights of nature?
Mm-hmm. That's key, right? And that's part of this shift in consciousness, right? Understanding that, and so spirituality comes in here too, right? Where we understand that spirit is in everything. once you have that experience, right, which the church helps people have, when you have the experience that spirit is everything and is in everything, you can no longer just harm anything else, because it is you and you are it. So that changes everything. And now how to do that in practice, right? That's more difficult, right? And that's why we have this framework to help people understand what that really means in practice. But shifting this consciousness, it can happen many different ways. And for people who sort of already have this consciousness, there's certain similarities in life experience and things like just being able to spend time in what we might consider nature, right? When people grow up in urban areas, they just don't have this kind of, let's call it an eco-consciousness or a spiritual consciousness, understanding that the rest of life very much has rights and has as much right as we do to be here, and more probably, right? That's one of the consciousnesses I want to bring to people also. If humans weren't on this planet, how would it be? Probably better than if we were here. And then this regenerative approach invites us to think about how could humans and the rest of life be here in ways that actually enhance and create a more thriving existence than if they were separate, right? Because that's the promise of regeneration and regenerative development, and our nature as spiritual beings being here, right, in human form, that we have this opportunity to be in this coexistence with the rest of life, so that this whole planet can be more thriving than if we were not here together. And so these are some of the deeper things that we work on with people.
Wonderful. I want to comment on that, but I see we've got lots more questions coming up. So Deborah, welcome. And where are you located, Deborah? And feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad I was able to jump in here. I'm Deborah Snyder with the Institute of Ecotechnics, and we are also members of the Open Future Coalition. So that's how I came across this gathering today. I saw the notice about it, and I've been working since 1981 on how to harmonize the technosphere with the biosphere. I kind of been pinching myself here for the last half an hour trying to imagine how in the last 5 years while I was sleeping, everybody started to do all the things that we dreamed about. And all of this language and everything that was just in a complete, realm of fiction or fantasy, dream world is happening, is being presented in front of my eyes. This kind of approach to holistic thinking, community development. I live at Synergia Ranch just south of Santa Fe. It's an intentional community that was started in 1969. And it's one of the 2 continuously operating communities in artistic and ecologically oriented. I have been working to develop, I would like to join an alliance with you to develop these K-12 educational programs. I'm launching an initiative to fund biosphere learning programs, and to get, because people don't know what a biosphere is still. I was involved from 1984 to 1994 in designing and building and operating the largest closed ecological system to study the Earth's biosphere and to develop systems and techniques that would help support where technology helps work in harmony with nature. So I'm very much aligned with what you were talking about. I looked on your website. I'm glad you have one site. We're going to be building online curriculums. Some of the programs that you've developed perhaps might fit in some of the sections. I've talked with other people at the Open Future Coalition about this over the last year as we've been developing, and maybe we could form something like the Amazon swarm. We could form like the learning swarm or the educational swarm, because there's quite a lot of us that are in here that are, kind of got these initiatives. We understand that it's very important to educate a shift that isn't just going to come from reading it on the pages of a book. And how do you do that? The idea of spiritual development, spiritual growth is deeply intertwined with what's happening. And it's just so fantastic to see this organic swelling of community outreach and the networking of networkings, this radical collaboration going on, it just gives me a huge amount of hope. So I am in the OFC, but my email is here, and I resonate with everything that you're saying, and I just wanted to say how right it is, everything that you are doing.
Thank you, Deborah. Yes, please do reach out. Let's make this happen.
Wonderful. And I'm going to put in the chat also, if you are not part of our Kinship Earth community on the Open Impact platform, it is go to kinshipearth.com. You can just click on our join tab. That'll give you more information. And I put the direct link in the chat for those in this room. You can go ahead and create your own profile. It is still in beta mode, but it is an opportunity after this meeting, because if we could all sit and share, we would be here for 6 hours and we would have so much fun, but we want to be mindful of everyone's time. So it's a great place to connect offline. And as we continue to weave our community and our network and our work together, really that's the purpose of this, this Kinship Earth Connections, to be able to make these connections. So one of our esteemed board members, Wendy Elliott, is in London, and it's late for you. Thank you so much for joining us today, Wendy. Go ahead and feel free to share.
Yes, hi, Leah. Beautiful work. I'm going to echo Deborah, because it's, for many of us have been working on this kind of thing for 20, 30 years. What's extraordinary about the times we're in is we're seeing a consistent narrative happening across sectors, which is very beautiful. But I've literally just come out of a 2-day long meeting with some of the leading sustainability education organisations in the UK, working with schools, working with thousands of schools. And one of the interesting things about that, and why I'm in that conversation, is to lift it above a focus on SDGs, and in particular SDG 4.7, to say that this is a systemic issue. And that conversation about the inner and the outer, and an understanding of spirituality, is absolutely fundamental to successfully raising that to being an extremely powerful, collaborative kind of movement. So I think it's really interesting. A number of us are working in education, and I mean, there's nothing I didn't agree with that you said. And what's exciting, I think, is we're now coming together. And there is definitely a move. One of the fields that seems that people are now all wanting to join is education. So I too am very interested in this, and providing consistent narratives, as I say, across continents, where we can all support each other in ensuring that we're saying the same thing. So yes, just very interesting. I heard what wonderful work you're doing, but as I say, very beautifully aligned with certainly everything I'm doing, and I know everything Kinship Earth is doing. So just lovely to be connected, basically.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes.
I'll also just draw attention, while we want certain outcomes, right, everything has to be culturally appropriate, right? And so this is something in sustainability that hasn't worked also, right? Trying to have like cookie cutter approaches everywhere, which of course won't work, because we have different cultures everywhere, and everything is culturally specific. And so while we can create sort of general guidelines, right, everything needs to be created or attuned to become place-based and culturally based also.
So true. One of the things, being in Leah's presence, I just have to say, when she talks about everything being so connected to the land, and we were there on the land and had that full experience, it's so much richer than just the intellectual principles. And that's where the spirituality piece comes in. It is a lived experience. So grateful to be connecting. And then again, witnessing the cross-pollination, the weaving, as we're meeting each other and finding each other, many of us working on the same things. So I encourage you all to put your contact information in the chat, join our community, and let's continue to follow up after this. So George Orbelian, one of our advisory board members, one of the best networkers on the planet, who is so committed to giving nature a voice. Please feel free to share.
Thanks. So yeah, beautiful presentation, Leah. Really appreciated it. And I'm on the board of the Buckminster Fuller Institute. So I don't know how much you know about Bucky's work, but his quote, "Make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone," which he, used in his world game in the mid '60s. But he's been such a wealth of resources and information for what we're facing now. He actually forecast that humanity would, be in this touch and go moment where it would either prove its ability to stay on the planet or it would extinct itself off. So a couple of things, I know from my decades of being in this work that, we talk about the spiritual. And, one of the things about consciousness is what you think about ends up going out into the field and creating it. And so I wanted to ask about how we could collectively look at this situation from the other side, where we don't even acknowledge the possibility of being separate from nature and being one, and then create an actual field that we engage with from that perspective. And Bucky said that every child is born a genius, and we de-genius them in the way we bring them up. And when we look at the incredible developments we've made that we call human progress, we started with the horse and buggy, and now we have Formula One cars and cars that can drive themselves. We started with the Wright brothers, and we just recently launched the James Webb Space Telescope, and we're on our way to figuring out interplanetary travel. And the thing that we've utilized in all that was engineering and measuring and precision. And whenever there was a failure, we came back and we analyzed what happened. We went back to the drawing board and we made something better. One of the things we haven't done in human evolution as of yet is we haven't created a set of codes that help us understand what healthy, thriving nature really looks like. The soils, the water systems, the plants, the air, soil, water, biodiversity, how we integrate that. And my colleague at the Buckminster Fuller Institute, Tom Chi, he does a very beautiful presentation that I think you would enjoy called "Everything is Connected." And he also did a video of helping humanity become net positive to nature. And he has a fund he created called At One Ventures that is set up to restore and regenerate our planet. And it's bringing in 40+% returns right now. So we see that when you start looking at system-wide health, you're factoring in disaster preparedness, supply chains, business continuity, and community resilience, economic stability. All this gets fixed when you look at the big picture, just like health does. So love what you're doing and look forward to working together and sharing all the resources that we have here collectively. So thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, this code you talk about, this is what I was trying to get at with that regenerative community development framework, the evaluation part of it, right? Because knowing when a living system is healthy is actually not that hard. Like we know what the characteristics and criteria are in general. The trouble comes when you try to make it really specific for each place, because we are so far away, right, from the state of health, that to come up with sort of quantitative measures of what that means can be tricky. And because we're so stuck in this mentality of basically barely getting by, like what are the minimum requirements for humans to survive here, right? Which is not really health. You know, health is vitality, it's vibrance. So
Yes,
maybe, take a look. You can find some publications on the websites that I put up. And there's one in particular that talks about this framework, and you could read through that and see what you think. And I'd be happy, I'd like to know what you think.
yeah, and I think another thing that technology is allowing us to do is, you know how much money companies spend on research and development? Well, now that we're interconnected, the whole planet is a big R&D network, right? Every creator can send can send and get information from a consumer of their products and improve in a geolocated perspective what's going on. So we have tools right now that, you know, we need to use, you know, to pull us through, and luckily they're here. So yes, so it's a great time to be on the planet.
Yes, and just situations like this where we can meet each other and know each other and say, oh, he's working on that and she's working on that and we're working on that. Let's work together. Let's combine forces. So that's part of what this is all about. We're very excited to combine forces and support Leah and the work that she's doing with the Regenerative Living Institute and her other Koru Collaborative and the Shamanic Church. So it's very exciting. Stephen, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, so it's in our name, kinship earth. I mean, we are accelerating kinship and accelerating the consciousness that we are all kins with all life. So that's in our very name. But I do want to say that I deeply resonate, Leah, with the point you made that looking at the world scientifically and technically is one way, and that has been our dominant way. We've given full reign to that over the last 300, 400 years of the technical and scientific revolution. But what you said is we also have to live it. And living systems are adaptive and dynamic and changing constantly. But living it, that piece, how do you live it, to me is a very, very important aspect of your message. So I really love that you're putting that in your message, because I think that's the piece that we're very weak on. We don't know how to do that in our modern Western cultures. We just don't understand what does it take to live it. The other comment I wanted to make is that calling one of your organizations a church is sort of really not a word that conveys. I mean, we think of churches as the Catholic Church and the Episcopalian Church and all those churches. The kind of church that you're actually talking about is a life church. It's a church of love. It's a living, adaptive, you know, being in the moment, being alive with life in the symphony of life. And I don't know if there's a proper word for that, actually. Church is so short, falls so short of calling what you're doing there. I wish we had another word in the English language to cover that. But finally, I want to encourage everybody here that hasn't spoken to, I mean, here's your chance to address Leah and ask questions. We're really encouraging you to participate here. Anyway, that's it.
I want to let Leah respond and also echo what Stephen said. And maybe it's not, if you don't have a question, that's okay. If we can keep our comments, we still have a little bit of time. So if you can keep your comments brief, we may have time for everyone to just say who you are, where in the world you are, and how your work aligns with what we're talking about today. So Leah, did you want to respond to the church comment before we pass it to Carmen?
Yeah, two things. This spiritual piece too, I heard it said very well by one of my children's teachers when he was saying the particular type of school they've been in for a while. They teach not just things that address the brain, but also the soul, the spirit, and the will. Okay, so these things have to align. And he said, we can develop all these mental capacities we want. We can develop all these will forces we want. But if we're not led by our hearts to do the right thing, we could do things that are very damaging, which in fact we have, right? And that's what we're seeing now, that we haven't been heart-centered, we haven't been heart-led, we haven't been spiritually led. And so, like you said, Stephen, I think this is the piece and we have to bring back. And we don't have to use any particular terminology. Some people are offended or get triggered by the word spiritual or anything like that, and that's fine. There are other words we can use. But being heart-centered really is what we're talking about. And the reason I use the word church for that organization is purely legal, right? There's a legal formation, a legal entity that protects certain practices, right? If it's under that formation, that legal entity of a church. And so that is why we do that, because there are certain practices that we consider to be essential for developing this remembrance of who we really are, right? That right now can only happen in certain states in the US as well as through a church.
Beautiful. All right. So Dr. Carmen in Cuenca, Ecuador, welcome.
Okay. Oh, hi. It looks like I was in silence. I'm sorry. I just realized I was going to unmute myself and I just realized it looks like I was unmuted all this time. Thank you very much again for this beautiful presentation, Dr. Leah Gibbons. Very quickly, here's my question. It has to do with regenerative communities and your course and your certification course. And what everybody has said, Lauren, you commented, George, you know, how with technology, with the internet, look what we're doing right now, how we're all connected. The R&D now is in the global stage, etc. But when we get into the regenerative communities and what you're doing in the Institute, how are you approaching or integrating online regenerative communities? How can we bring in regeneration into an online community for cultural creatives such as myself that are creating communities? Kinship Earth is creating also an online community. And how can we bring the principles of regeneration to that type of community, which does not exist in the physical universe? It is existing in the virtual universe.
Yeah, good question. So in regeneration and regenerative development, we have, I mentioned it's ultimately place-based because we're connected to the earth, we're connected to where we live. But there are social components, right? So I call those physical components, and then there's social components. So these are some of the things you're talking about, Carmen. And of course, even place-based communities have social components. But we have this unique phenomenon now where we have some purely social groups and social organizations. And so those can be regenerative as well. And so if we're looking at those, it's really about how do we help each individual get in touch with and express, their unique essence that they bring into this world to make it a better place. And then how do we support them in bringing that into their place-based communities to help the place-based communities become regenerative. And so, in these types of online groups, things like regenerative communication are super important. Like I would say that's the first thing for any purely online social group. People have to learn how to communicate. It's a very simple thing, but it's something that most people are not good at. That's a whole another talk also. Then we have regenerative governance systems. How do we enable each person to contribute and co-create in ways that are somewhat structured, because we're not used to that. We don't know how to do that. So we have to relearn these things. And then we can have online regenerative education, even though ultimately having education have place-based components is very, very important. And there are many more. We can look at things like regenerative economics and finance, which is moving to digital. And that's a whole bag of worms that a lot of us have dipped our toes into and is very complicated. So I hope that addressed your question.
Yes.
It's all very complicated, but it's good that we're looking at it and we're trying to figure it out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Lynn, in Toronto, I believe I recall meeting you in, I think it was the Fritjof Capra group, wasn't it? Yeah, good to see you again. Welcome.
Yeah, this is one of the first, hi everyone. This is one of the first sessions I've been able to join. Maybe I was one other, but I'm so glad it's the time, or the time worked out. I think we're saying often how great your presentation, Leah, is because it just is so coherent, right? You kind of create that flow of I really love that. And so I just compliment you on pulling pieces together and making them flow. And in a way, that's what I'm trying to do in my work. And it's going to lead to a question for you about governance. So in what I'm doing, I think while I think we're creating this wonderful community of people thinking and talking the same way across the planet, across all these communities, it's fabulous, right? But many of those communities, we don't have sort of the levers of power. So what I'm working in particular on is what would be a regenerative approach to classic governance, because organizational governance is really nested in last century, previous centuries, even values and ways of doing things. And that hasn't evolved. It's stuck, and it's very codified, and it's very checklist oriented, and it's very tooled and powerful, but it also is so limited in this environment. So what is that up leveling and the fiduciary concern that all boards need to have? And so I guess my question to you is, as you think about your work, is there a place for organizational governance? And anything that you might suggest by way of both cautions, because I think there's real cautions in it, because organizations have to, classic governance sometimes, we have to acknowledge that every organization is part of a network and an ecosystem. But also I worry too that, by taking sort of regenerative approaches into sort of classical organizations, I worry about co-option, like whether or not, it can be a new form of greenwashing, but it has to be authentic. But we have to have all hands on deck. So this is what I'm trying to address, this dilemma. So any thoughts, Leah, would be welcome.
Yeah, and this is a very interesting question, right? Because when we form organizations, there's usually an aim, right? We form this organization because we want certain things to happen. So if we're taking a truly regenerative approach, like we can't even do that, because in nature, things evolve and change and grow and emerge and can end up completely different than how they started. So this is one of the troubles, right, with applying purely regenerative principles to organizational development and governance, because we want things to go in a certain direction. So we can talk about things that are an organization that might be purely regenerative and we're just along for the ride, and whatever happens, great, like let's just let it unfold and see what happens. Like we could do that, but for the most part, most people don't want to do that. So, people have created things like holacracy and tried to apply that, but that has some downfalls as well. And then there's like sociocracy and these forms that are trying to mimic how nature works, as far as like nested networked holes, where the higher, I say higher levels, just meaning that there are levels of organization that provide like constraints to the lower levels. And this is how nature works also, right? So like the earth as a whole, has certain parameters that the lower levels will never escape. And this is the same in social organizations as well. Like you can set parameters, right, that are the essence of the organization, right? What is the organization's purpose, right? For Earth, the purpose is life, life in certain ways. And so those are the parameters and the constraints. And then at each of those levels that are in nature, right, they're geographical. So it's easy to say a higher level, lower level. And by that, I just mean these geographical sizes, essentially, right? Like the size of a plant, or an individual plant, right, will never be able to, on its own, right, completely influence the way the larger ecosystem is behaving. But by having these relationships with all the other organisms and the abiotic components in the ecosystem, they can influence change upscale at those larger levels of ecosystem and biome and so on, and eventually the globe. So, this is one of the approaches we talk about in regenerative community development, that change can happen upscale, and it can happen very quickly if those lower levels are networked and they're working together to create change. Then you can catalyze change upscale. And because we're at this point where our larger Earth systems, as they're operating, are not, they're not changing quickly enough or changing in directions that we want, because they're actually going the opposite direction, degenerating. So for them to become regenerative, we have to do this at smaller scales, and we have to network to catalyze change upscale, and we have to do this very intentionally. And so you could structure organizations really the same way, where you enable these smaller units, right, of people or whatever it happens to be, to have their interactions and then be able to network with the other units, right, to catalyze change. Now, this isn't to say that any idea that somebody comes up with is going to be implemented, because that's not how nature works either. It's if there's some innovation that happens that does benefit the whole, right, that benefits the entire system, eventually it usually becomes adopted, right? Because as it spreads and benefits more life, right, it will just naturally become part of what the system does. And so in human organizations, you can structure them in the same way to encourage innovation, to encourage people to share ideas, try ideas, implement new things. And then if they work, you can adopt them as a whole organization. Now, part of the trouble with this is resources, right? Because let's consider a traditional organization where people are getting paid hourly or salary or something, right? They are going to get paid to do this. And most of what they come up with or try is probably going to fail. This is just the nature of things. So we probably want to look at ways to ensure or to limit that investment in innovations that are not beneficial. So there are ways we can do that. There are ways we can support people in coming up with truly innovative and new ideas, instead of just perpetuating the same old ideas that don't work, which is most of what our society does, right? Just kind of tweak what exists and make it a little bit better, incremental changes, which are not what we need right now. We really do need transformational change, which means completely different than anything we've ever thought of before or done. So there are ways to do that. And of course, the leaders of any organization, they have to be these regenerative leaders. They have to be servant leaders. They have to be supportive of every part of that organization living into its fullest potential and expressing its essence. And how do you do that? For leaders to be regenerative is really, it's difficult, right? It takes people who are really strong within themselves and know who they are and are so secure with who they are that really their role is to develop that in other people and other organizations. So developing your leadership team is really important, and supporting the structure as well as just each individual in the organization is really important as well.
Thank you. There's some great points there around nodes and creativity and innovation and constraints and leadership that is strong enough. So thank you so much. There's lots of good thoughts. And I'm going to put in the chat some of the pieces that I think are part of regenerative governance, just for everybody's absorption. So thank you so much, Leah.
Wonderful. And I want to bring up just a reference to our beloved founder of KINS Innovation Network, Susan Davis Mora, and her book. The principle of her book, The Trojan Horse of Love, is we all begin with ourselves, and we infuse that energy of love and our consciousness of regeneration into our communities. And then the other principle is that we work together in small groups, supporting each other so that those ideas can be adapted more widely. And so that is a fundamental premise of KINS and Kinship Earth and what we're all about. So I see Richard has his hand up. Richard, I don't know if you're able to turn your camera on, but welcome.
No, thank you for the welcome. Unfortunately, my
camera isn't working all that well, so I won't be able to show my pretty face. But as George was talking about the work of Buckminster Fuller, which I have been a sort of a student of for many years, and talking about transformation in social living and various other kinds of ways. I've been really intrigued with what Fuller was trying to get across through what he called the geometry of thinking, and for us to learn how to think from the whole to the part instead of from the part to the whole. And I'm just wondering whether in your Regenerative Institute, whether that kind of information is being shared, or there's courses or ways in which you have tried to help people sort of make that really big shift from whole to part rather than part to whole. And I've found my experience has been that until we start to really do that, we won't get out of the reductionist mechanical sort of system way of trying to solve problems, or as you've just said a few minutes ago about every time we try and solve something, we still do it out of the same box. So no matter how creative we are, we end up making the same mistakes all over again. And so hold apart thinking is tough, because it doesn't take you very long before you get into it, and then a default comes back and you end up thinking part to whole. And we think that, you know, if we add up enough parts, then we can solve the problem. And my work in suicide prevention is along this line. Most of the theory says you've got risk factors and you've got protective factors. And if you can add up enough protective factors, you can cancel out all the risk factors. And people think that's a predictive way of trying to solve the problem of people who want to get out of the pain of living, but they don't want to really die. They want to find a new way to live. So just some thoughts that you might have on hold apart thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a critical skill we teach people right away, right from the first introductory course. And of course, when we go into the certification, like, this is huge. You have to have this skill to be a regenerative practitioner. So there's some very simple ways we can teach people to do this, because it is the fact of our existence, right? Like our bodies, for example, we start here with our bodies and teach people that way, and then we just keep spreading it into bigger and bigger systems, because it's at these long.
Oops. My apologies, Leah. I was trying to mute someone who was coughing and I accidentally muted you. Sorry.
Okay. I'm not sure the last thing you heard, but it tends to be at these larger scales where people can't make the mental leaps. And, part of that is because it is very hard for our brains to deal with complex systems, really impossible. But, luckily we don't have to. There are a few factors we can look at, to understand or try to understand complex systems. And so at some point there does have to be a shift between this whole to part to whole understanding from complicated systems to more complex systems. And how do you help people make that shift? And, how then do we interact in complex systems as part of them without this, what's really a basic human fear on the uncertainty of life, right? And this takes us back to the spiritual, because we have this discomfort or fear of uncertainty. And when you have enough spiritual development, that goes away to a large extent, right? And so again, this is all related: the spiritual, the scientific, the consciousness, the being, the acting. I hope that answered your question. I don't want to give away too much of what I teach in the course, but yeah, we do teach that.
So we've only got a few minutes left. Oh, go ahead, Richard.
Well, I was going to say that's interesting too, in terms of we don't want to give away too much, but we're also into open source and those kinds of ideas, and what is proprietary and what isn't, and the notion of stewardship versus ownership. All these are really big issues and ideas to be thinking about. But, you know, talking about complex systems, I found that once I understood about the basic complexity of the geometric tetrahedron and how that can be applied to living, then you can really unfold out to all kinds of complexity and then fold back in terms to a level of complexity that one is comfortable with. But you can never really go below 4 as the sort of minimum sort of nature of complexity, and understanding how those interconnections play out in terms of the overall strength or weakness of a community or a way of doing things. Anyway, thank you. I really appreciated your answer.
Thank you.
So regarding open source and proprietary and things like that, I would imagine that if we can all pool together all the resources to support Leah and the work that she's doing, we could take all this and make it open source. But for now, we are still living within the confines of our system. And I see the value for anyone who wants to get that level of training and then spread and infuse those ideas within your own community, to circle back with Leah and take a look at the courses that you're offering, Regenerative Living Institute, starting in February. And I would imagine some will be offered online after that. So what I want to do next, I'm going to share my screen briefly before we close, and just a couple of notes, some upcoming events to stay tuned for. So in February, we are inviting the team from Planetary Care to deliver a panel discussion. So we have Forrest Tanner Lighthouse and Marion Wine, along with Juan Whiting and Dr. Melanie Carlone. They have some very exciting announcements about the impressive work they're doing with regenerative agriculture and living soils. And then in March, we are pleased to introduce May Mahboob, who will be talking about digital currency and the emerging technologies that are making accessibility to resources in places where people have traditionally been underserved as a new way of spreading equity and inclusion.
Lauren, can I say a little bit more about her, just very briefly?
Of course.
If you put her picture back on. May is the CEO of MBD Financials. She is acknowledged as one of the leading women in the blockchain, one of the leading intellectuals in the blockchain, also a person from Bangladesh who rose from a little tiny mountain village to take on this leadership position. And she's just secured $50 million funding for her company. So she is working with the woman documentary producer in Texas who produced the series on heroes of the 21st century. And they're now going to do another series called the Heroes of the Blockchain, and they're focused on looking at kinship Earth as a possible subject of one of the next documentaries. So we're very excited to have her on board. She has her own big following. I'm not going to be surprised if she brings 20 or 30 people from her network to that particular March 10th event.
Right. And it is helpful for all of us to just find out who in our community is doing what and how can we learn about these emerging technologies. We have more presentations coming in April and May that we have not yet published, but I wanted to also reference that we're having an invitational Regenerative Eco Village Collaboratory and Summer Solstice Festival at Finca Sagrada. This is a commitment. There will be, it takes a couple of days to get there. It is something that we're all going to be doing. It's kind of a working, playing, collaborating with Susan and Walter. And we are blessed to know that the Kogi Mamos of Colombia will be there leading some ceremony, and we will all be working together. So I have a form on the website where for now, if you're interested, please go ahead and fill out that form and register your interest. And then we will be publishing more information as we get closer to that event. And then also, if you've missed some of our previous Kinship Earth Connections events, want to let you know that we have a video library. There's all kinds of amazing kindred spirits with their presentations. And if you haven't already, we invite you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that is just at Kinship Earth on YouTube. So I'm going to stop my screen share now and bring it back to the group for any closing comments, questions to Dr. Leah Gibbons. Leah, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your wisdom. Kinship Earth is excited to collaborate with you and the Regenerative Living Institute for our upcoming projects. And again, everyone, if you haven't already put your email or your contact information in the chat, please feel free to do so. So Leah, any closing words from you?
I just, every time I'm with a group like this, I'm so inspired and grateful and thankful that we're all doing this work and we're, collaborating. And it's just very inspiring. So I want to thank you all and encourage us all to keep going. Because I know I have my days where I'm discouraged. So let's just keep going and reach out to one another when we need encouragement.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to honor and acknowledge all the wisdom in this room. There are so many people doing such incredible work. Yes, I see Susan doing this. And this is about the collective and sharing our wisdom and working together and finding how we can do that. So if you haven't already, there is a button. There's three little dots. You can click Save Chat and then keep others' contact information. Once again, you can go to kinshipearth.org, click on the Join button, and you can learn how to join our beta online community so that we can follow up in between meetings. And we look forward to seeing everyone again at our next event in February. So let's all unmute and say thank you to Leah and farewell, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, Leah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you,
Fantastic.
Leah.
Very
Thank
well
you,
done.
Thank you.
everybody.
Aloha.
Very helpful,
much.
so timely.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Lauren. Great job.
Thank you,
always-
Lauren.
Thank you for joining us for today's Kinship Earth Connections event. We encourage you to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. To learn more and get involved, please visit us at kinshipearth.org.